An original podcast from podlatino.com.
Some people don't run from God out of indifference. They run because they sense Him, because something inside them knows that getting too close would mean letting go of things they're not ready to release. It's not a lack of faith. In a way, it's too much clarity. Augustine of Hippo was one of those men, brilliant to excess, passionate to the point of disorder, honest with himself in a way that can be painful to witness. He spent decades searching with everything he had, while at the same time dodging the answer he could feel waiting at the bottom of the search. He was born in 354 in Tagaste, a small town in Roman North Africa, in what is now Algeria. His mother, Monica, had a deep and demanding faith. His father, Patricius, was a pagan. That tension was present from the beginning. Two different worlds living under the same roof. Two ways of understanding life that the young Augustine absorbed before he was old enough to choose between them. From early on, it was clear he had an exceptional mind. He learned quickly, argued precisely, and had a memory his teachers couldn't ignore. That intelligence was his pride, and, for a long time, his shelter. He arrived in Carthage as a teenager to study rhetoric. It was the cultural capital of Roman North Africa, a loud, brilliant city full of temptations for an ambitious young man trying to make his way in the intellectual world of his time. There, Augustine found what he was looking for, and also what he didn't know he was looking for. He found philosophical debates, theaters, friends who argued ideas late into the night. And he found desire in its most concrete form, attraction, pleasure, the emotional life his body and heart were asking for. It wasn't a youth of wild excess or total moral darkness. It was something more complicated. The life of someone who wanted everything at once, who was hungry to think and to feel and to shine, and who still didn't know how to hold all three together without them pulling against each other. In Carthage, he had a stable relationship with a woman whose name history never recorded. They were together for years. From that relationship came his son, Adeodatus, whose name means given by God. Augustine loved him. He was not a man who turned away from his emotional life out of coldness. He lived it intensely, and with a growing awareness that something in him didn't quite fit, that the love he gave and received couldn't fill a hollow he still didn't have words for. During those years, he also began searching for philosophical and spiritual answers in a more deliberate way. The Christianity he had seen in his mother felt, at that point, too simple for his intelligence. He wanted solid arguments, not inherited faith. And in that search, he found Manichaeism, a religious and philosophical movement that divided reality into good and evil as two eternal principles locked in permanent conflict. The idea appealed to him because it offered a coherent explanation for the problem of evil, an answer to the question that followed him everywhere. If God exists and is good, why is the world broken? Augustine followed Manichaeism for nearly a decade, not as a casual observer, but as someone who studied it, debated it, and taught it. He was intelligent, and he wanted to understand. But over time, that system began to crack. The answers it offered couldn't hold up against the questions he himself knew how to ask. And that left him, once again, in an uncomfortable place, without the framework he thought he had built, and without knowing what to put in its place. He traveled to Rome, then to Milan. The drive was professional. He wanted to advance as a teacher of rhetoric, reach influential circles, claim a place in the world he believed he deserved. Ambition wasn't a minor flaw in Augustine. It was part of his architecture. He wanted to be recognized, He wanted his intelligence to matter in the world. And in Milan, he got what he had worked for. He was appointed professor of rhetoric at the imperial court. It was exactly the kind of position a brilliant young man from North Africa could dream of reaching. And yet, at the very moment of arrival, the restlessness didn't disappear. It grew heavier. Also in Milan was Ambrose, the bishop of the city. He was a rigorous, well-formed man with an oratorical skill that Augustine recognized immediately as exceptional. At first, he went to hear him the way one professional studies another, not as someone seeking conversion. But something in Ambrose's preaching began working on him differently. Ambrose interpreted Scripture with an intellectual depth Augustine hadn't encountered before. This wasn't the naive faith he had dismissed in his youth. It was a faith that didn't ask him to stop thinking, but to think further. That threw him off. One of his main reasons for keeping his distance from Christianity was that he saw it as incompatible with serious thought. Ambrose slowly took that excuse away. But understanding wasn't enough. Augustine's problem had never really been intellectual. It was a problem of will. He later described it himself with a precision that still holds today. He wanted to change, but not quite yet. He wanted the truth, but not all the consequences of actually living by it. He had built a life, an identity, a web of desires and habits that worked. Not perfectly, not peacefully, but they worked. And letting go of all that required something he wasn't ready to name. Surrender. The same intelligence that had carried him so far also served to delay the inevitable, to find one more reason to wait, to convince himself that the moment hadn't come. His mother Monica had come to Milan. She had spent years praying for him with a perseverance that wasn't resignation or emotional pressure. It was faith. She believed Augustine would find what he was looking for, even when he didn't believe it himself. She didn't argue with him. She stayed close. And that constant presence was part of the quiet web of grace surrounding his journey, even when he couldn't see it. The breaking point came in a garden in Milan. Augustine was in crisis, broken from the inside, exhausted by his own division. He had spent years knowing what he needed to do and being unable to do it. That day, something gave way. He heard a voice, or something like a voice, telling him to take and read. He opened a text by Paul and read words that landed exactly where they needed to land. There were no lights, no spectacle. It was the moment when a life that had been resisting finally stopped. Not as defeat, but as the kind of exhaustion that turns, at last, into rest. The surrender Augustine had kept putting off happened there, without extraordinary witnesses, in the quiet of a garden. He was baptized by Ambrose at the Easter Vigil of 387. That same year, Monica died, shortly after her son's baptism. There is something in that sequence that needs no commentary. The mother who had prayed for decades lived to see what she had asked for. And then she was gone. Augustine returned to North Africa. He sold his possessions, founded a small community of shared life, and began writing with an intensity that wouldn't stop until his death. He was ordained a priest without having sought or planned it, in a situation he later described as something the community pushed on him and he didn't know how to refuse. He was then consecrated Bishop of Hippo, a coastal city where he would spend the rest of his life. From there he governed, preached, debated, taught, and wrote. His confessions grew out of that whole process. Not an autobiography in the modern sense, but a conversation with God spoken out loud. A text where Augustine hides nothing because he has nothing left to hide. He also wrote The City of God, a monumental work that tried to respond to the crisis of the Roman Empire from a spiritual and historical perspective. He died in Hippo in 430, while the Vandals besieged the city. He was 75 years old. The Church recognizes him as a doctor of the Church for the depth of his theological thought and his lasting influence on Christian spirituality. What gives Augustine's life its weight today isn't the list of his works or the title history assigned him. It's that he put into words something many people experience and few dare to say this plainly: that you can have success, pleasure, intellectual recognition, real relationships, and still feel like something doesn't fit. That restlessness isn't always a sign of immaturity or ingratitude. Sometimes it's a sign that the heart is looking for something it hasn't found yet. Augustine didn't reach God because everything else failed. He reached God because he discovered that everything else, even the good things, couldn't answer the deepest question. His holiness didn't come from a life that was ordered from the start. It came from a long search, sometimes messy, sometimes painful, but always honest. It came from being willing to look at himself without escape and say yes to something that demanded he change everything. Augustine spent years running from God, not because he doubted his existence, but because he sensed that meeting him would cost him the life he knew. And he was right. It cost him that life. And in return, he received one he never could have imagined.